parties to this conflict are required to respect international humanitarian law that has a set of rules that guides how combatants are to conduct themselves. For example, combatants are prohibited from targeting civilians in their attacks. They are also prohibited from targeting civilian objects in their attacks, including civilian homes, for example, including hospitals and other places. If parties to the conflict, to a conflict like what we have seen in Sudan right now, conduct themselves in a manner that's not consistent with how international humanitarian law requires them to conduct themselves, then they are likely to commit war crimes. In this context, we have been able to investigate and conclude that parties to the Sudan conflict have, including the SAF and the RSF and allied militia, have carried out indiscriminate attacks that killed and injured many civilians in Sudan. And they have also carried out targeted attacks, and particularly the RSF and allied militias have carried out targeted attacks against civilians that led to the killings and injuries of many civilians. They have also targeted and attacked civilian infrastructure, including hospitals, including humanitarian and civil society facilities, and they have also carried out extensive looting. Some of the violations we documented in this report, including the indiscriminate targeting of civilians, deliberate targeting of civilians, the indiscriminate attacks on civilians, the sexual violence and rape against women and girls, and pillage. All of these are war crimes. We were able to document around scores, dozens of women and girls who were particularly subjected to sexual violence and rape, mostly by the RSF and allied militia. The cases, of course, we have in this report are much, much lower than the actual sexual violence and rape cases that have occurred in the whole country. In West Darfur generally, we were able to document deliberate targeting of civilians by the RSF and Arab militias in ethnically motivated attacks. This report is based on 181 interviews conducted between April and July. Most of the interviews were conducted in Eastern Chad, one-on-one with people who fled from West Darfur. But many other interviews were also conducted remotely. Some interviews were conducted in person in Nairobi and in London. The report is also supported by other evidence, including digital evidence, including photos, satellite imagery, and also reports from forensic reports. We are calling on the Human Rights Council, for example, to establish an investigative mechanism, an independent investigative mechanism that has the ability to monitor, collect, and preserve evidence of violations that are being committed in Darfur and in the rest of Sudan, to ensure there is accountability for all the violations that are taking place, including the war crimes that we have documented. We are also asking the African Commission on Human and People's Rights to dispatch a fact-finding mission to Darfur and to the rest of Sudan to ensure they are able to document, collect evidence, and preserve that evidence for future accountability purposes. We are also calling on the UN Security Council and the ICC member states to increase funding for ICC to be able to carry out investigations into the recent violations that are being committed in West Darfur. This accountability must be pushed by all parties, by all partners of Sudan, including regional partners in IGAD, the African Union, and everyone else. The situation for Sudanese refugees who fled the country, both in Eastern Chad, where we have been, and in other places like Sudan, is really dire. When we were in Eastern Chad, we have seen families, large families, who were not able to even get enough food. There was no shelter. Many people had bullet wounds, and they were really struggling to have access to enough medical care. We are calling on the international community to ensure there is increased support for humanitarian support and access, both in Sudan and also outside Sudan.